Hi, this is Jose Martinez with First to Pass Real Estate School in Miami, Florida. I wanted to go over with you guys today authorized brokerage relationships in Chapter 4. Basically, what I'll be talking about is the three options a broker has when representing the interests of buyers and sellers in residential resale. So, again, the three options that the broker has as agent in representing the interest of buyers and sellers in residential resale. As associates, you would be sub-agents of these relationships. And there are three in Florida. The first one is single agent. Single agent relationship is a fiduciary relationship between the principal, which is the client. In this case, we can refer to the buyer and seller as clients. So a fiduciary relationship between the principal, the client, and the agent, the broker. So in green, I'm going to put some triggering terms within the questions that should trigger you to know that it is a single agent relationship. Single agent relationship in layman's terms, pretty much you're going to represent this person, this client, as you would represent your own interests. I'm going to draw a full cup of water and I'll go over why I'm drawing this cup of water. This represents what we owe this buyer seller in a residential resale transaction, right? And we're only interested in this or having to pay special attention to this when the same brokerage is representing both parties. When I say the same brokerage, we'll use ABC Realty as an example. ABC Realty has the seller, and perhaps maybe John is representing the seller at the office, and Lewis is representing the buyer. Now, the duties that are prevalent in single agent is COLD, is the acronym to remember them. Confidentiality, obedience, loyalty, and disclosure in full. So you must be obedient to your principal as their agent or sub-agent in the case of an associate. So again, confidentiality, obedience, loyalty, and disclosure in full. These are the most prevalent and the ones you want to remember. Now we'll go over others in a moment that are also part of single agent. Over here, I'm just going to write SA. We know it's single agent. Whatever transfers from on the left under the seller would transfer to the buyer. Same triggering terms, same duties in COLD. We have our full glass of water, and we are going to remember these by not overfilling these cups. Now, the second one is transaction broker, which is the most commonly used relationship because it is presumed. And I want you guys to remember that transaction broker is presumed under Florida law. So here in green, some triggering terms that should trigger you to transaction broker is presumed. Well, they're not going to write the word presumed, but if you get an example where you don't receive triggering terms for the other two relationships, then you should default to the presumption in Florida law that the example presented on the state exam is a transaction broker. In this case, they would be your customer. In this case, the glass is half full. And hopefully there's no pessimists out there that would consider the glass to be half empty. In layman's terms, you would be representing this person's interest in a limited capacity. What I want you to know is that you do not work to the benefit of one party to the detriment of the other. So limited, presumption, and customer under transaction broker. And I will put together a few scenarios here shortly. The most important duty, most of the duties are going to have the word limited, but you want to know here that you must present all offers and counteroffers. We're just going to go ahead and put here present all offers. Lastly, you have no brokerage relationship, where you are telling the buyer or the seller that you do not represent their interest. Now, this person, there's really not much triggering terms other than non-representation, but this person we owe three things to, three duties. A, D, D would be the acronym to remember it. So the A is for account for all funds, deal honestly and fairly, and most importantly, you want to know that you must disclose all known facts that materially affect the value of real property that are not readily observable. Moving in to when must these be established? Well, I want you to know that single agency and no brokerage must be established at some point. Transaction broker, again, it's presumed in the state of Florida. Therefore, you don't have to establish this relationship. If you just go about your business in the representation of a seller or buyer, you are acting under the presumption of a transaction broker, a limited relationship. Again, you don't work to the benefit of one to the detriment of the other. In this case, nothing has to be given. There is a form for your reference. In case it may be requested, it's available, but it doesn't have to be given. Single agent and no brokerage must be established at some point with the seller before or at time of entering into the listing agreement, with the buyer before showing them the property. Now, if I represent the seller as a single agent, my one and only option would be to represent the buyer in a no brokerage capacity. And again, these relationships are established with the broker, therefore the brokerage, whether it's the same associate or whether it's two different associates at the office, you must pay mind to this. If I represent the seller as a transaction broker, then so I don't overflow my cups, I can represent the buyer also as a transaction broker, or I can also choose to represent the buyer in a no brokerage capacity. My cup doesn't overflow. We must disclose to the no brokerage buyer that we do in fact don't represent their interest. Furthermore, in the state of Florida, there is no requirement to represent the interest of buyers and sellers outside of the three duties that we owe them, right? That we must keep in mind. The brokerage of holding escrow must account for the funds. You must deal honestly and fairly, and you must disclose, again, all known facts that materially affect the value of real property that are not readily observable. Now, I can take buyer and put it on the left side. Let me go ahead and do that. And then put seller on the right, and it changes nothing. I want you to understand that. Now, what's in red travels upwards in duties. So if we owe ADD to those that we don't represent, then we would have to give the same to somebody we are in a transaction broker relationship with. So ADD would transfer up to transaction broker. Now, present all offers would go upwards to single agent, just like ADD would make its way all the way up to a client that you would be representing as a single agent. What I want you to know is that these duties do not travel downwards. So cold is not owed to somebody in a transaction broker. So it definitely would not be owed to somebody in a no brokerage capacity. So know that the duties that are basic for no brokerage would be owed to transaction broker and single agent. Present all offers and counter offers would go upwards to the single agent. Duties would not go downwards. I'm going to go ahead and give you guys a few scenarios to help bring this together. So some examples when these would be used. First example, I go on a listing appointment. So it doesn't sound like jargon. A listing appointment is an appointment that you would go on as an associate or broker, convincing a seller to have you represent their interest in the sale of their home. So I go on a listing appointment. We'll say it's a Jim's house, and I give Jim my spiel, my marketing plan. He likes the experience I have. He's all ready and done to go ahead and list. And his one objection is, I guess he's pretty savvy. We'll say Jim's an attorney. He says, Jose, I want you to go ahead and list my home. I like what you bring to the table under the condition that you represent me as a single agent. All right. Well, since I have to give him this form, I'm going to go ahead and go into my laptop and I email it over to him, and that's proof enough that I sent it over to him. Right? So again, these forms, single agent and no brokerage, must be given, established, and I did so before entering into the listing agreement. So I get the listing signed, and we'll say I listed it for $600,000. I put it on the market. My sign gets there a few short days later, and I get a call from a buyer. I tell the buyer, let's meet at the property at 6 p.m. I meet him. As mandated under Florida law, I hand him over a no brokerage relationship. He happens to fold it up and put it in his back pocket. Okay. So I show him the house, and as we walk out, he says, hey, I'm interested in making an offer. What do I have to do? I said, follow me back to the office. Let's go talk about it there. So I go ahead and set up the offer. And the last thing I ask him is, well, we know we're asking 600. You're going to be paying 600. He says, well, the last one sold for 575. I want to offer 575. I think that's what's fair. But listen, Jose, I don't want to lose out on the house. Need be, I'll pay the $600,000. All right, so I put it all together for 575. I make an appointment with Jim, my client. When I go and present this offer to Jim, what I tell Jim about the offer? Everything under loyalty and disclosure in full. I tell him that buyer will say, Matthew told me that he wants to offer 575, but this is the neighborhood he wants to be in. He doesn't want to lose out on the house, that he's willing to pay 600. Why? Because I'm going to represent my single agent client as I would represent my own interests. The buyer, I handed him over as mandated under Florida law, no brokerage relationship. Whether he read it on the way to the office or he did not, he told me that he was willing to pay more. My loyalty lies with my client seller in this case. I'm going to give you another scenario while we're on the topic of single agent. This is on the state. Your principal, which should default you to single agent, tells you to not show the home to persons of a certain color or any of the protected classes under the Fair Housing Act of 1968. Well, we have obedience here under single agent. Now, are we obedient to the point that we break the law? No. In this case, you're going to choose that you're going to have to withdraw from the offer. So if Jim told me not to show the house to somebody of a certain religion, I would have to say, Jim, I can't do that. We're going to have to terminate our business relationship, our brokerage authorized relationship. Now I'm going to give you another example, and I want you guys to think about this one hard. I go on a listing appointment for a townhome, and I sit there, I give my listing presentation to the owner. We'll say Juan, and Juan thinks it over. I suggest that we should be listing the property for 285. The last one sold for 275, but Juan's property is immaculate, so I feel like we should be able to get 280 for it, possibly even 285 in a hot market like today. But Juan thinks his townhome is the best one in all of Florida. And he says, no, I'm pretty sure we can get 299 for it. Let's at least start there. I'm motivated. I want to sell, but I think we can get to 299. Well, since Juan has motivation and he's open to lowering it, the price, I go ahead and I list it at the 299. Now, next day, we'll say, on Zillow, I get a call from a buyer who wants to view the property. So I tell the buyer, hey, meet me there Saturday at 1 p.m. I meet the buyer at the property 1 p.m. I show him the home, the townhome. And as we're leaving, he's like, hey, listen, I want to make an offer. What do I have to do? I'm like, follow me back to the office. So when we get to the office, I have everything prepared, printed out as usual. Price is usually one of the last things we talk about. And I'm like, so you're going to offer the 299? He's like, no. He goes, listen, the last one sold for 275. This townhome happens to be ready to go, fully remodeled. I know the seller sunk some money into it. So I'm willing to pay him 282. I might go up to as far as 290, but I'd really have to think about that. Okay, so I draft it all together for the 282. I go the next day to Juan, the seller. What do I tell Juan, the seller, about the offer? Nothing, other than what the offer is. Hey, listen, I got an offer from a buyer for 282, the one that came by here yesterday. Not that I don't tell him nothing. I have to tell him the offer itself. But I do not tell him that this guy said he's willing to pay 285, possibly 290. because you should have picked up on my scenario that I was working under the presumption. I didn't give anything to the seller. The seller wasn't my client. I didn't hand anything to the buyer when I showed him the property. These are the scenarios you'll see on the state exam where none of these in green would trigger you to pick another relationship. Therefore, you have to default to the presumption in Florida law that this person is acting as a transaction broker. There's another question on transaction broker where on the state exam where a broker is eating lunch with his best friend. The broker just recently received a new listing. He talks about it to his best friend, and the best friend asks, hey, what's the lowest they'll go? Well, again, best friend or not, in this case, nothing prompts me to pick any of the other relationships. It's a presumption. It's a transaction broker situation. What has been brought to me by students is that the correct answer there should be, give me an offer, I'll present it, right? Because present all offers is part of transaction broker. Now, lastly, what I want to go over with you is those two examples, but there is another example, and you may have learned in your course, where you have a single agent seller and a single agent buyer represented at the same office. Can't put it together. That's so far what we've talked about, right? So you could not put these together. We'll say Jim at the office and Lewis each have single agent relationships established. Lewis's buyer becomes interested in Jim's listing, and we can put this together. But both parties must sign this document, and both would take one step down. And this is the transition to transaction broker notice. Both of them must sign. Now, there's a scenario on the state exam where you represent the seller as a single agent, a buyer that the same associate represents comes to the property to view it, and you hand them a no brokerage relationship. Now, the buyer analyzes and says, nah, I'm not going for this. They say they want some form of representation. So the broker, the associate, explains to them how transaction broker works. And they agree. What does the associate or the broker have to do to put this deal together? And the correct answer would be have the seller sign a transition to transaction broker notice. There is no need to give anything to that buyer because that buyer has agreed, reluctantly or not, enthusiastically, they have agreed to being represented in a limited capacity. There's nothing to be given to them there. Both of them do not have to sign the transition to transaction broker, only the seller, because the seller is the single agent. I hope this clears up authorized brokerage relationships for you guys. Check out our website, which is www.passrealestateschool.com. We have courses coming up for the 63 hours live and on Zoom, virtually. Also, state exam prep questions like the ones I've mentioned now, post-licensing, you name it, check out our store. See you for the next video. Bye and good luck on the state.